Good evening. Welcome to Wednesday evening teaching of the series which I call Experiencing the Buddha's Teaching. So this series I started early this year, and I have this idea that we can take some of the important topics in Buddhism presented by Buddha and look at them from a slightly different angle, from the point of view of good evening, great, and look at them from the point of view of how can I develop my own personal experience of these teachings, the various concepts and ideas presented in the Buddhist teaching. How can I, mainly through meditation, find my own experience and hopefully my own understanding, experiential understanding of those topics, of those ideas. And as for the topics, I follow a traditional presentation in Tibetan Buddhism, in the Gelug tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, a teaching usually known in Tibetan as Lamrim, or stages of the path to enlightenment. So which basically arrange the different important topics of Buddhism in a kind of sequential manner. So I have covered a section called the small scope of motivation, and we are now at what we call medium scope of motivation. What it really refer to is beyond trying to be as happy as we can be in our daily life, we might be preoccupied with the existential kind of problem of asking, where does suffering come from? Why do I suffer? And you want to go really deep down into the root source of my own suffering. And this is the main concern of the medium scope of motivation. And in relation to the Buddhist teaching, this is often presented as the Four Noble Truths, which really is the first thing that, according to legend, that the Buddha taught after his enlightenment. 4 different points, which I have covered in the previous module: the truth of suffering, the truth of the source or origin of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path or the way leading to that cessation of suffering. So, in fact, this module will be on the Noble Eightfold Path, which is an elaboration of the 4th Noble Truth, the way that we can take, or what we need to create or gather or cultivate in order to actualize the cessation of suffering. I thought just to maybe very briefly recap, even though the 4 Noble Truths of Buddhism is pretty famous, most people would have heard of it or read about it, studied it, and but still, I think it's good to just kind of revisit it. And also, you may find that many people have different understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. So here I'm just presenting my own understanding of it, and for your reference, and you can reflect about it, think about it. The first Noble Truth of suffering is usually the one that people focus on, because people tend to think of it as very pessimistic. The Buddha is saying life is suffering. I don't actually agree with that way of explaining it. I think what the Buddha says is there is suffering in life, not that life is itself suffering. But of course, you're welcome to have your own interpretation. So I'd like to think of first Noble Truth is to emphasize that there is suffering in life. There's of course happiness, of course there's many moments of neither here nor there, but there is suffering in life. And then we can ask the question, what is the source of that suffering? What is the conditions that create or that make us suffer? So that's the second Noble Truth. And the Buddha identified craving, which is a kind of state of mind, right? A mind of craving, of holding, of grasping. Just by this presentation, you have a good idea that I think the suffering that the Buddha is concerned about is existential kind of suffering, as opposed to the suffering like, I run out of money in my bank account, so what can I do to pay the bills, which are the more material concerns, which are also, of course, suffering. But I think the spiritual teachings, the Buddhist teachings, primarily address our existential anxiety and fear, as well as the psychological aspect of suffering. So, and that's why the source of suffering is identified by the Buddha as craving. Craving is not, in this context, is not just simply this one thing, which is how we normally tend to understand it. It doesn't just refer to our sort of insatiable desire, for more pleasures and more of this or more of that, which is a form of craving. But there are also more subtler form of craving. So there are three types. Craving for sensual pleasures is one type, but there's also another type that's called craving to be or craving to become. And this has very much to do with our sense of self. Craving to be famous, craving to be rich, craving to be powerful, craving to be invulnerable. So it's all these different ideas of self, which at different times or in different people become very important to them, become synonymous to them, synonymous to happiness to them. And you find that people can devote tremendous amount of energy and time, make great sacrifice to try to accomplish it. Those are a form of craving, craving to be something or someone. And also sometimes you can also understand this as crave to be, or can also be to have, to be someone that possesses certain things. For example, wealth. You can think of it as someone who is wealthy or who possesses great wealth. That for some people is maybe their goal in life because they equate that with happiness, maybe. So that is a form of craving. Or whereas others may be more into being famous. I don't know why, but you might equate being famous to be well known by many people as something really wonderful. Maybe not. Yeah. So the third form of craving is almost the opposite. It's usually called craving not to be or to not be, which is almost sounds like the opposite. And there are, of course, circumstances where, normally we try to live as long as possible. Ideally to not have to die. So that is one aspect. But then there are also the opposite, the craving to forsake this life, the craving to die, because maybe life is so miserable and so difficult and painful, and we couldn't think of a way out of it. So we become obsessed with this. We sort of been caught up with this idea of to end one's life. That is another form of craving that comes under craving not to be. The famous line from Hamlet, to be or not to be, which is when he's contemplating suicide. So somewhere along the line, so we have on one hand impulse or craving to grasp onto certain images of self, ideas of self, and craving to be that. And we can also, depending on the circumstances we are in, flip over and to the other extreme of craving not to be. All right, so these are the three types of craving. So by mentioning, I just want to mention means to show that the source of suffering is not just simply desire or greed. It can be quite subtle as well. And the third noble truth is, based on this analysis, you can almost understand. So if suffering, the so-called suffering that the Buddha identified, comes from craving, therefore, if we are able to put an end to that craving, we are able to somehow abandon it or bring about a cessation of craving, then there is a corresponding cessation of suffering. And then we will be free of that suffering. So that is embodied in the third noble truth, cessation of suffering through the remainderless fading away, stopping, cessation, abandoning of craving. Right. Actually, the idea of Four Noble Truths is quite simple. There's a cause and there's an effect. If I don't want this effect, I have to avoid or remove the cause. And the fourth noble truth, which is what we're going to look at a bit closer, over the next few sessions is the method to put an end to craving, and therefore to put an end to the corresponding kind of sufferings. And this fourth noble truth is presented in 8 different points. Buddhism, we love our lists. We like bullet points. Yeah. So there are 8 items, normally called the Noble Eightfold Path, which is means the path embodies 8 different items that we can work on, we can cultivate, and they foster or to create the conditions to bring about the cessation of craving. So we will kind of take a closer look at the 8 of them over the next few weeks. And just to briefly mention them, just in case you don't know, you can always Google, look up Wikipedia to find them. Right view is the first one. The second one I usually translate it as right intention, or the kind of right attitude, to hold within our mind. Right view, right intention. This form one group. This usually is related to wisdom, this group. Yeah. And the next 3 form another group. Right speech, right action, right livelihood form the group of ethical behavior. And the last 3 is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And this has to do with how we use our attention, how we use our mind. So some people call it meditation, some people come under concentration. Traditionally, it's also come under the training of the mind. So these are the 3 main groups, the 8 different items of the Noble Eightfold Path. But let's look at the right view as the beginning, and that's the foundation for enabling us to free ourselves from craving, or to lessen, weaken, and eventually be free of craving, and therefore also be free of the corresponding suffering that arises due to our craving. Right view is a very important item, and by putting it at the beginning of this list, I hope we can appreciate its importance. Its importance is almost like saying the most important thing in this particular so-called spiritual approach is to get the view right. View, of course, has to do with how we look at things, how we see things, how things appear to us. If you are stuck with a wrong view, then everything will go wrong. If you start with the right view, then everything will be right. So getting or figuring out which one is the right view and which one is the wrong view becomes very essential, very important. View can also mean understanding. I like to think of it as perspective. Quite often, we ourselves, as we grow up, we start to we internalize the views, the beliefs, the opinions of the people around us, the significant people around us, of our society, of our culture, of our family, and those ideas come to influence how we view our life, how we view relationships, how we see things. And based on that, those views that we build up, views which include also our beliefs, our opinions, start to influence our behavior as well, influence our choices, influence how we go about doing things, what we aspire towards. So view is very fundamental, and it's worth spending time to sort out what is my current view of life, what is my current view of relationship, what is my current view of ethics, what is ethical, what is not ethical. And then in the light of the teaching, like for example the Buddhist teaching, to query those things, to see whether they are in agreement or in disagreement, and then to double check again who got it right. Right here is not in some kind of absolute standard. Right as in which of these is the most conducive for me in finding happiness, or in the context of Four Noble Truths, is most conducive in helping me to be free from suffering. by freeing me from craving, the source of suffering. So I hope that gives you some idea. So I like to think of it as using a psychological term as a different framing. We come in maybe at the moment we have a particular frame. That's how we see life. We see life through this framing. In psychotherapy, we also talk about helping others. One way we help others is to reframe. So basically, the same picture, but seen through a different frame. Have a different point of view, a different perspective. And sometimes just by changing the frame, not the actual situation, not the actual person, not the actual experience, but because you frame it differently, you notice different things. And you might even respond differently. And voila, just by changing the frame, what used to be viewed as very problematic, terrible, in a new frame, from a new perspective, might be experienced very differently. And might trigger a very different set of response. And what seems intractable, without any solution, suddenly there is a lot more options available. So many different ways we can tackle it. And there is no longer such a big problem. Yeah. So this way of understanding changing views as changing perspective, shifting perspectives, helping us to step out of our old view, our old perspective, and finding a new way of looking at things, at events, at people, at relationship, is what I feel is right view is all about. So what is this right view of Buddhism that is so important? That's the foundation of the Noble Eightfold Path. A simple way of presenting, there are many ways of presenting right view in Buddhism. I like to, in this course, present it as the right view of conditionality. Conditionality as in seeing things in terms of conditions, seeing how one thing is dependent on another, how the different things act as conditions to bring about an event, a happening, an experience. So everything is conditional on others, dependent on other conditions, and gathering of different conditions bring about different effects, bring about different results. And this is like a particular lens we put on to see all the different experiences that we have. So already this idea of conditionality is embodied in the Four Noble Truths. Right? It's talking about, so when we discover that we are suffering, then we ask, hey, what are the conditions that contribute, that bring about this suffering? And when the Buddha identified, one of the main conditions is craving. Right? So just as conditionality means if I have the conditions of craving, then that contributes to my experiencing suffering. And if I don't want the suffering, then all I need to do is to remove the conditions of craving. In the absence of craving, then suffering, which is its result, will not arise. So this is our way of thinking in terms of conditionality. This is a way of looking at a situation in terms of conditionality. Sometimes also called dependent origination or dependent arising in the Buddhist teaching. Yeah. So this is what I'm presenting as the right view. There is the right view applied in a broader context in general. So we are invited to see reality through such a lens. The Buddha summarized it in a few sentences. This is a summary of dependent arising. Some of you might have heard of it or read about it. He said, if this means a particular object or X, this is a variable. If this is, that is. So if this exists, that exists. With the arising of this, with the coming into existence of this, that comes into existence. So this is one part of it. If this is not, that is not. With the cessation of this, there is the cessation of that. So this is his way of presenting in general this conditional relationship between two things, or basically between anything or all things. So one thing and another, like cause and effect, have a kind of causal relationship. With the arising of the cause, it bring about the results. If there is this particular condition, then that result will be present. And conversely, with the cessation, the stopping of the cause, then there is also the stopping of the corresponding effect or result. So this is stated in a very general sense. Can apply to our experiences. It can also apply to the physical world, which we can observe, of course. This idea of if I take the effort to plant the seeds, create the conditions, bring together conditions, then in a few weeks' time, the seed will sprout, and in time I will have. It's possible for me to harvest the fruits. Whereas without planting the seeds, then it is not possible to expect that I will be able to harvest the fruit. So it's very another way of understanding causality. So this is stated in the general, so it's applied to all general conditional phenomena or experiences. But then it's also stated in the specific in relation to suffering and the end of suffering. And so this is the right view. Okay, so we can explore this in meditation. So I thought before I go on and on, let's do a meditation together to see whether we can find anything corresponding to this idea in our own experience. In meditation, especially meditation where what we call calm abiding meditation is the perfect arena to understand firsthand the power of such a view of conditionality. We can think in terms of conditions. What are the conditions that I can gather, that I can create in my meditation that facilitates a shift in my meditative experience? So in calm abiding meditation, we're trying to calm the body and mind. We're trying to allow our attention to engage more and more fully with the object of meditation, and to let go more and more of all the distractions and all the hindrances, so that we go from where we are now, how we experience things, to a state of deep meditative absorption, right? Whereby the mind is so happy to just focus on whatever it is we're meditating. Could be the breath, could be loving kindness, could be a mantra, could be a visualized image. We're so happy to fully engage in it that it stop noticing, it stop paying attention to other things. It just doesn't bother about the sound. Sometimes people experience as if the body has disappeared in their meditation. It's just not so much the body disappear, but your mind is no longer paying attention to the body. It's not interested. It just let that go. It let go of all those other things that are of no interest to it, so that more and more attention is just given to whatever it is that we are meditating. All right. So this state of concentration or absorption is a conditional state. It's a conditional experience. It feels very nice, and we can accomplish it by understanding the conditions that is dependent. Then we know for ourselves, if I'm able to gather the correct conditions, then naturally the mind would manifest this experience of deep absorption. And also we can tell in the absence of some of those conditions, this doesn't happen. Instead, other kind of experience will happen. If some of the conditions, let's look at it, is posture. Posture in meditation is very important. If we got the right posture, it facilitate entering into meditative absorption. You get the wrong posture, you spend the whole session fidgeting, struggling, waiting for the meditation to end, waiting for the bell to be rung, and of course you are preoccupied by all sorts of thoughts. Oh, this is no good, this is bad, so on and so forth. Posture is one condition. Second condition is how do we help the body to settle down. And usually, I would say this second condition, helping the body to settle down, one of the conditions is giving attention to the body, returning attention to the body. Notice how the body is feeling. Reconnect the mind and the body, facilitates the settling down of the body. So this is the second condition. Third condition, facilitate the settling down of the mind, helping the mind to be less crazy, less jumping here and there, less agitated. What is the condition? Allowing the mind to come into contact as part of the meditation, pleasant feelings, pleasant experiences, experiences of ease, of relaxation, of comfort. Very pleasant feelings helps to calm the mind down, helps to calm down the agitated mind. So that's the third conditions. And so if we are able initially to gather these three conditions, a supportive posture, returning attention to the body, and then attending to the pleasant feelings that come out of the meditation, then we find that there is a shift in our meditative experience. By bringing together these conditions, something happened in our mind, in our meditative experience. We find that, hey, I think my mind is settling down. I think I'm becoming more and more absorbed, focusing on the object of my meditation. So we can see this cause and effect relationship in our own meditative experience. We can see the power of thinking in terms of conditionality, in terms of conditions. If I gathered the right combination of conditions, then I will get to experience the corresponding effect result. And conversely, I can also analyze. In the absence of some of those conditions, I will have experienced a different kind of meditative effects or results. Yeah. So we're going to meditate on that and see whether we can verify it in our own experience. And this is my way of emphasizing that. And this is really what the right view is all about. Of course, the right view go a bit much deeper. Right view talk about suffering, not just in meditation, but in general in our life, and not just the conditions that affect meditation, but the conditions that affect all our experiences in our life, which are craving, that brings suffering in all circumstances of our life. So it's a much broader kind of thing. But nonetheless, we can test out some of that idea in the kind of laboratory or the microcosm of meditation, and see whether we can appreciate directly this relationship that the Buddha is emphasizing as part of the right view, to look at our experiences, to look at the happenings or whatever it is we're interested in relation to conditions. Coming together of certain conditions bring about certain result. The dispersing of those conditions bring about the cessation of those results. Right? So, of course, if you have any questions or comments in this class, you're most welcome to post them on the live chat. But let's give it a try. Let's have a short meditation and see whether we can explore this relationship of conditionality in our own meditation, and see whether we can start to try on this way of looking and seeing our experience, through the eyes of conditionality. So first is to choose as a first condition a suitable posture for our body. So feel free to you can choose to sit on a chair, like what I'm doing, sit on the floor. You can lie down on your back. You can, if you have a reclining chair, you might want to experiment meditating the reclining posture. So it's just conditions which we can test out and see how it affect our meditative experience. So whichever posture we choose to adopt, very important is to ensure that our spine, our back is comfortable in that posture. Allow the back to be upright if we are sitting, straight if we are lying down. And make sure that the entire length of the spine is as comfortable as it can be. Take care that the posture we adopt does not introduce unnecessary pain or tension into the spine, especially at the areas of the neck and the lower back. Rest our arms and hands on some kind of physical support so that we don't have them dangling and we have to tense up our muscles to hold them up. So we can rest, if we're sitting, you can rest the hands on the knees, or we can put them one on top of the other and rest them in the lap. Lying down, we can rest both arms on the floor or whatever support by we are on. Rest the arms by our sides. Feel free to close your eyes completely if you find that easier. Otherwise, if you are more used to it, you can also keep your eyes open or half open. So let's give our body some time to adjust, to find its way into this meditation posture. See if we can, in this posture, become aware of the sensations coming through, the points of contact between our body and our seat, our body and the ground. At those points of contact, see if we can become aware that our body is resting on a support that feels safe, solid, firm, and stable. And that the whole posture is also correspondingly well supported, well balanced, and safe. Once we are able to do so, the feeling of support, of stability, really help the body to begin a natural process of unwinding, of loosening up. Our body can release some of those tensions and tightenings. Tension and tightenings, which are our reactions to stressful situations in life, whereby we tense up to brace against the impact. So now we can let that go. We can unwind. We can give the body time to release and relax. So this is the first step and also the first condition of acquiring a suitable seat for our body in meditation. And next, I'm going to invite you to return your attention to your own body, to get in touch with the bodily sensations at the different parts of your body. Without much effort, don't have to tense up more muscles, don't have to try very hard. Just a light touch, just to awaken the connection that we already have between body and the mind. So starting at the crown, I invite you to be aware of sensations at the crown of your head. Simple sensations, maybe a bit of tingling here and there at the crown, a slight feeling of pressure, maybe a sense of warmth, coolness, and also quite possibly nothing at all. And then allow our attention to move downwards into the face so that we are aware of sensations at our own face. Check in to see whether we have unconsciously tensed up the muscles of our face at the areas of forehead or jaw or around the eyes. See if we can relax some of those tension in the face and welcome in a feeling of softness, of ease and comfort into our own face. Moving downwards, attending to the sensations at the neck, at the throat. And then continue into the shoulders. How are the shoulders doing today? When we do encounter unpleasant feelings, pain, tightness, see if we can simply acknowledge these feelings, these sensations as they are, acknowledge them, and just let them be for the moment. We allow our attention to continue down both arms at the same time, so that we awaken and reconnect with the sensations at both arms, sensations starting from the shoulder joints, down into the upper arms, the elbows, subtle sensations at the elbows, the forearms. Notice sensations here. Very simple sensations, nothing spectacular. The touch of fabric against the skin, the tensing or relaxing of the muscles, subtle sensations at the joints. And we let our attention flow into both hands so that we become very aware of sensations in the hands. Sensations in the palms, the back of the hands, sensations in the fingers. Now that we are aware of both arms, see if we can simply rest them on their physical supports. Surrender their weight to that physical support and allow both arms to rest more and more comfortably in this position. We return our attention to the chest, and by now most of us will notice that our attention doesn't always stay with the body. There's a tendency to wander off, thinking, ruminating, distracted, or drifting towards sleep and downness. So we simply invite our attention when we notice that to come back to the body, to reconnect with the body. We create this condition and see what happens. Notice sensation at the chest, the movements of the chest related to the breath. Sensations at the front of the body, and also sensations at the back of the body. Moving down to the abdomen, we notice sensations here, the skin, at the muscles, at the organs. The more we return our attention to the body, the more we reconnect the mind with the body. We're hoping with this condition to trigger a deepening release of unnecessary physical tensions and tightness, the untangling of the different physical knots. We let attention flow downwards into the pelvis, becoming aware of sensations here at the pelvis. From the pelvis, we allow our attention to move down both legs, reconnecting mind with body. Notice sensations starting from the hips and moving at our own pace towards the knees. Continue down towards the ankles at our own pace. And finally, we allow attention to flow into both feet so that we are aware of sensations at the soles of the feet, top of the feet, sensation in the toes. See if we can rest our body in the posture. Now that we have scanned through the entire body, allow the body to continue to settle down into this posture. We rest our attention with the body, bodily sensations, breath sensations. But in particular, see if we can notice any feelings of pleasure, or relaxation, or ease and release. Feelings that come out of our meditation, pleasant feelings. However mild that sense of pleasure may be, see if we can welcome it into our awareness. See if we can notice it, attend to it while it is here, and let it go when it fades away. Returning our attention not only to the bodily sensations, but also to pleasant feelings that arise within meditation. We are creating yet another condition, this time to see if we are able to settle the mind, calm down the reactive mind, agitated mind, and help the mind to release and let go of these agitations, these mental reactivities. Returning our attention to here and now, to the bodily sensations, to the breath sensations, and in particular, to notice any pleasant sensations, however slight they may be, that we can find within our meditation. We welcome that pleasant sensations into our awareness. We notice it. We allow ourselves to appreciate and enjoy these pleasant feelings, no matter how weak or mild it may be. And then let it go when it starts to fade and disappear. Coming back to one's meditation, checking in to make sure that we are able to create favorable conditions, that our posture is supportive and does not introduce unnecessary pain to our meditation, that we are able to reconnect the mind with the body, that we are able to attend to the different bodily sensations, and the third condition, that we are able to discover, find, and welcome pleasant feelings into our awareness, pleasant feelings that come out of our meditation. And now and then, check in to see how your body is feeling in meditation. What is happening to your body as we continue to meditate, returning attention to bodily sensations here and now, returning attention to pleasant feelings happening here and now. Okay, so this is a simple meditation, but anything can be approached, view, and understand in relation to the right view of conditionality, we can use it to analyze the situations, or in this case, apply it to the context of meditation, and to check for ourselves to see whether there's any truth in what the Buddha is talking about, what the Buddha taught, the right view of conditionality, of dependent origination. So meditative experiences are a category of phenomena or experience that are conditional. They depend on conditions. And so is it possible for us to apply this understanding in our own actual practice itself, and work out for ourselves, if meditative experience is a conditional phenomena, then it must depend on certain conditions. So if I can create those conditions, not only will they trigger a shift in our meditation, but by sustaining those conditions, maybe it will enable me to go deeper into my meditation practice. So that's how we try to think in terms of conditionality. And the same idea can then be applied, generalized into basically anything. That's if it is true, which is something very important for us to verify for ourselves. So if it's true for meditation experience, is it true in our experience of suffering and happiness? The suffering dependent on conditions, in particular dependent on craving. So we can investigate that and figure out for ourselves. Anytime, any point of time, if we feel that we are suffering, then we can look, is the conditions of craving present? Is it here? Is it because of that condition of craving? That's why I suffer. And conversely, if for one reason or another, I manage to stop craving, or the craving goes away, does that mean that, is it true that the suffering also disappears? So we test out this view, this understanding, and see if we can shift the way we look at the situation into one that we rely predominantly on the right view of conditionality. This is the first of the Noble Eightfold Path. So up to this point, if you have any questions or you have some comments, you're most welcome to write it in the live chat. So I like to, for the rest of the session, then to elaborate on the right view and try to see if I can emphasize how important it is to not only think in terms of this right view, but to actually see if we can experience it, to the extent that we automatically start to analyze and look at the situation from this different angle, from this different perspective. And that is what it means by cultivating the right view. Of course, first of all, we might do it intellectually. Usually that is not very useful, because most of the time we tend to forget about it. We may remember it if we are in the context of this discussing Buddhism, but when we are outside of this context, we tend not to remember it. And the right view is not only just a kind of conceptual understanding, but we must try to internalize it if we find that it is true. Internalize it so that it comes to affect how we view things, how we understand our day-to-day experiences. When I first started studying Buddhism, I came across a book that collects the teachings of Thai Buddhist master Ajahn Chah, who is an excellent teacher and apparently also a very powerful meditator. And some of the teaching he gave to his his students, his disciples, monks, and Western students. Once in Thai Buddhism, I think they, especially among the monastics, they have to go through a formal education. They have to sit different level of examinations. And he told some of his students that now that they have finished all their examination, they should take all their textbooks, all these Buddhist textbooks, put them in the cupboard, and put a padlock over it, lock it, take the key, and throw it away. And so basically lock up all your concepts. And now what they need to do is to look at their own heart, look into their own mind, and see for themselves, whether those concepts they have learned, are they true or not? Or to also gain for themselves their own experiential understanding of those ideas. So in other words, not to keep going back to the textbooks, not to keep relying on talking about just the conceptual, intellectual understanding, but to develop their own experiential understanding, and hopefully their own experientially their own view, which hopefully coincide with the right view. And to do that, as he suggests, we have to look directly into our own heart, into our own mind, into our own experience. Would you say being flexible is an example of right view? Yes, I would say that thinking in terms of conditionality help us to stay flexible. Because one good thing about thinking in terms of conditions is we really appreciate how life can be complicated. Different conditions come together to fit into the situations, and as the condition change, then the situation also change. The situation could be a personal, inner experience, could be an outer event, could be a relationship between ourselves and others. And when we start to think in terms of this right view of conditionality, we can start to entertain different possibilities. Different combination of conditions, of course, yield different results, isn't it? And also because at any one point of time, there are often more than one conditions at play. Right? Of course, there may be one that is more crucial and influencing, but usually there are a few things at play. So if I'm not able to influence one conditions, then I can always approach it through another conditions. And if there are 5 conditions, that offer at least 5 different ways of influencing and changing the situations by working at each of the conditions. Of course, in real life, it's even more complicated because they are not necessarily independent of one another, and they may mutually influence one another. But nonetheless, it's really sort of, I always think of it as sensitize ourselves to all the multiple conditions that at play in that situation. In Chinese medicine, there is this taking the pulse, placing your fingers basically on the wrist and taking the pulse. And there is apparently not a simple skill to develop, and there are more than, it's not as simple as in Western biomedicine. It's not just taking one number, the pulse rate, the way the pulse is experienced. So apparently, according to Chinese medicine, give you different information. So by taking the pulse, it affords you a wealth of information of the conditions of the patients. Right? So we take the pulse similarly by sensitize ourselves to the changing conditions of the situations, and that afford us many different ways to intervene. And I think of it as being flexible. Inflexibility has to do with fixations on simplified ideas, and then holding on to those ideas regardless of the changing reality. And usually we do that because fixation gives us a false sense of security, a false sense of control. One simple way is to we experience it when we judge others or judge ourselves. We simply pigeonhole someone. Good person, bad person, and life becomes very simple, isn't it? I befriend the good one. I try to get rid of the bad one, and that's it. So, and it doesn't matter what actually happened to the person. Maybe the person will change. It doesn't matter because we are more concerned with keeping them inside the pigeonhole. We don't really want to know too much about the actuality of the person. What happens if I figure out that I have put them in the wrong pigeonhole? Or worst case scenario, they are more complicated than I imagined. And I don't have the suitable pigeonhole to put them in. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're neither bad or good. I don't have a pigeonhole. What am I doing with them? They are disturbing my universe. No. I don't want to be disturbed. No. So you stay inside your pigeonhole, regardless of whether I got it right or wrong. So that's fixation. Fixation gives us a sense that we know our world, we know our reality, and we are not interested in changing our worldview. We instead we insist that you conform to my fixated ideas and concepts. You stay within those pigeonholes, and I will continue to relate to you in the standard way that I am so used to relating to all these different things. So in other words, I'm not changing. I refuse to change my view of you. I refuse to change my behavior. I refuse to change my strategies, which is what we understand as being inflexible, isn't it? Regardless of the fact that actually everything changed. That kind of inflexibility becomes makes things really difficult for us when we encounter abrupt, sudden, and severe change like COVID-19. It can be very, very frightening and unsettling when things that we take for granted, a routine, usual way of handling things, doing things, how things ought to be or should be, everything suddenly becomes uncertain and becomes can be overturned, and can new possibilities arise completely out of our control. That can really stir things up for us, and different people will react to it very differently. We suffer basically, but we react to that suffering differently. Some of us may get very angry to the point of even manifest hatred. We are angry and we manifest hatred towards, we find someone or something to blame because they are disturbing my universe, my world. Others manifest great anxiety because it's a very worrying. Uncertainty become very apparent, and it's sometimes really difficult to get back to secure ground because the change is continuously changing despite our best effort to manage it. So there are different people may manifest different reactions. Under such situation, we can really see the value of being flexible, of thinking in terms of conditions. Then we don't feel that we need to single out any particular person or organizations or even ourselves to blame, because we can see that it is simply the coming together of different sets of conditions. And conditions change. Because they change, then of course the situation change, our experiences change. And all we need to do is to tune into the conditions, to sensitize ourselves to those conditions. As I said, to take the pulse of the situations and really pay careful attention to it, and try to work with the situation by working with the different conditions. Fair enough, maybe a lot of those conditions is beyond my control. I have to acknowledge that, but nonetheless, there's always certain things that I can do something about, and that by working on them, I can, in a way, help to manage the situation for oneself, manage my own reactions, my own experiences. Okay, so that is a little bit more about the right view of conditionality. Apply it to the context of the Four Noble Truths, to the context of the Noble Eightfold Path, and we'll see in the subsequent session, because I'm going to refer back to the right view for the remaining 7 items, how we can see and practice them all on the basis of this right view, this way of understanding things. Applied to the context of the Four Noble Truths, The right view is basically, it's actually really that's very simple. But sometimes simple things are hard for us to accept, to grasp, and to internalize. Is to really look at our suffering experiences. Every single experiences in our daily life, past, present, or future, suffering, with the lenses, through the lenses of conditionality, of the right view. So if I suffer, at any point of time I suffer, I ask myself, hey, what are the conditions? Is craving one of those conditions? Can I identify, can I find out and test out this teaching of the Buddha that says that craving is the source of suffering? If I suffer, where is the craving? Can I identify the craving? Craving, of course, is within the mind. And how does my craving manifest in this particular situation? And can I, for myself, experience that connection between craving and suffering and verify it for myself? I'll give you a simple example. Lately, I've been chowing down on, not lately, but I've been doing it for a long time, big bags of, currently I'm eating corn chips. Chowing down corn chips, usually watching some YouTube videos or something. And I find this kind of reaction of mine quite interesting. Usually I know I behave in this way when I'm trying to manage some kind of unpleasant feelings. Maybe not really anxiety, but something is happening in my life, and which I don't like. So I have uncomfortable feelings, not physical, but I mean emotional, and so that kind of unpleasant feelings tends to trigger a certain kind of behavior as a way of compensating or dealing with it. Yeah, and one of them is, you can call this comfort eating. I call it mindless eating. Yeah. It's just try to preoccupy my attention on not necessarily deep and meaningful things, but things that give me mild pleasure. So I will watch certain kinds of videos, or I will read certain kind of novels, and at the same time preoccupy my mouth with corn chips. And the whole idea is to eat it mindlessly, okay, not to eat it mindfully. And the other idea is the big bag to be consumed mindlessly, so that it's a way of, I think, generating very comfortable, familiar, mild pleasures, which helps for the duration of it to take my attention away from more unsettling things, unsettling feelings. Yeah. At least that's how I analyze my own situation. And I can then, if I can dig a bit deeper, look a bit closer, and ask myself, which I don't usually do, which is why I'm running away from whatever it is. What is happening? What is that unpleasantness that I'm avoiding looking at? And what am I doing here with this behavior? This behavior is based on craving. I can notice it because when I will hear myself in terms of my thoughts, suggesting that maybe now is the time to take out the bag of corn chips. Yeah. And that is craving in action, at least in my case. I might put it off. I say, no, I'm not going to do it tonight. Then it will come back again. It comes up in a specific form, accompanied by a particular feeling. And if I were to follow it, of course, I will get to experience that mild pleasure. But it brings, it complicates the situation. Of course, this is not very healthy for me, not very healthy physically for my physical health, but also it's not healthy because it's this kind of behavior doesn't actually address the real issue, the initial unpleasant feelings, which is maybe my reaction to certain situation in my life. So this is just a simple way of explaining how we can analyze our experience in terms of the right view of conditionality. And if I were to, which I don't force myself to, were to follow the Buddha's advice, then instead of chowing down the whole bag of corn chips and watching mindlessly hours and hours of videos or reading hours and hours of novels, I would stop and try to face the craving as it arises, and really notice what constitutes that craving. Craving in itself is very disturbing. It's a state of discontent, a state of a disturbed mind. The mind is struggling, trying to run away from something, run towards something. In itself, craving is very disturbing. And then I might even want to follow up on that and look at what is the initial thing that trigger the ariser of craving. What is the initial feelings? And what is the conditions to bring about that feeling? So by almost like tracing it backward, I can verify for myself, is there any truth in the Buddha's teaching that craving is the source of suffering? So that's how I think experientially we can apply. This is a very minor example, but then there's also other examples where we find ourselves repeatedly being unhappy, suffering. We find ourselves suffering from rage and anger and resentment, which refuse to go away, which flare up again and again, really disturbing us, disturbing the peace of our mind. Then we may want to take a closer look and see, hey, what is the dynamics? What is happening? What are the conditions? And if I'm suffering, where is the craving? Is there some form of craving underlying all this rage, anger, hatred, resentment? Is a form of craving. We normally don't call it craving, but we are, because we are obsessed with certain things. We are stuck with something. We are obsessed with, but of course, instead of something that we want to possess and draw close, we have the opposite reaction. This is something that we are obsessed about, that we want to get rid of, we want to push away, we want to hurt, harm, or destroy. Either way, we are caught up in it. We're caught up with it, but we just they are just slightly opposite in how we relate to the objects. Yeah, and it becomes most useful if we are able experientially to verify it. And the more times we try, and the more times it turns out to be true, the more confident we are in the truth of the Buddha's teaching of Four Noble Truths. And not only in terms of suffering, but also the third and fourth, the cessation of suffering. They are maybe more rare, but there are occasions where we are able to see ourselves putting aside the craving, dropping the whole thing. And this is valuable opportunity to experience the absence of suffering or the cessation of suffering. Something that has been tormenting us for quite a while. The moment arrives when we are able to put it aside. We can drop the craving and see whether we can also witness for ourselves the cessation of the corresponding suffering. One example, just to illustrate it, is at one point, this is actually an old story, some of you may have heard. I was very upset with my friend, someone. I got very angry. And as you probably know, when we get angry, we just go over and over again the incidents. We brought up old incidents. We project into the future about future possible incidents just to get angry again and again. And so in an angry frame of mind, I went to bed, fall asleep, and woke up the next morning. The first thought is I was angry again at this person. And this is very unusual for me. Usually after a night's sleep, I tend to forget about it. Yeah. But this time I didn't. I was just as angry the next morning as I was previously. And that really it's a shock for me. The first thing that comes to mind is this anger. I said, oh, that's not good. It's almost as if the anger is simmering there for the whole night. And so I decided, look, I cannot let this keep going on. I must take another look. I must deal with this anger in some way. This is so unpleasant. So I look at the object of anger, bring the person to mind, listen to myself, blah, 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 my angry thoughts. And somewhere in the midst of it, I decided that, is it possible, I asked myself, to see this person in a different light, from a different angle. And in this case, I am, for some reason, able to. When I ask myself, why is this person behaving like this, in such a hurtful way, and the thought comes to mind that this person is probably also very unhappy, also miserable, which I can appreciate. When I'm miserable, I tend to spread my misery around to other people. And that triggered a shift in perspective, that the person, my friend, is unhappy. And then that reminds me of what I know about his life, about his past experiences and how he dealt with it. So it's like I'm not the first incident. It's a certain pattern of behavior, and suddenly I noticed that my view of this person shift from someone who seems to be inherently hateful and disagreeable to someone who is suffering, someone who is actively suffering and unhappy, and has been unhappy for a long time, has been trapped in a certain situations that reinforce this kind of behavior, which is not helping him. And so compassion arises in that moment instead of anger. And I can really see in my own mind and heart, as the view shift and as the compassion arises, feeling for his suffering, his share of suffering, the anger starts to decrease. The heat of the anger starts to dissipate. And in this one incident, I suppose I'm lucky. It actually goes literally. I stopped being angry just within that few seconds, when the perspective shift, when I start to think differently. And for me, that is a very clear example of the validity of the Buddha's teaching of right view or conditionality of the Four Noble Truths. Because the conditions shift. Previously, the anger is a form of craving. When it is active, present, I'm suffering from my own anger. And when that condition subsides, because I change the way I look at the person appears to me differently, I have a different response. In this case, a sense of empathy, a sense of compassion, which is that is completely opposite to the anger. So as the image of the person shifts in my mind, likewise my reaction to this person also shifts. And as the anger subsides, the suffering due to the anger also subsides. And I find myself with a mind feeling compassion and trying to understand this person. But I definitely I'm no longer suffering from the anger or hatred. So, although it's a very simple example, but for me, it really kind of illustrates very clearly to me, hey, there's something is true with this teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And I feel that experientially I have, at least in one instant, verified it. And I verify many times, usually not in such a nice way. I verify that so long as I hold on to my craving, I hold on to my anger, hold on to my pettiness, I continue to suffer. That is also a different way of verifying it. I'm still suffering, I'm still unhappy because I'm still angry, I'm still attached, I'm still jealous. That is also another way of verifying it, because the craving remains, therefore suffering, the corresponding suffering also continue. So this is how I would suggest we approach the right view of conditionality. I wonder, is there any questions or comments after I've sort of blah 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 going on and on of the right view? I hope that maybe it would have given you a little bit of an idea how to approach this topic, the first item on the list of Noble Eightfold Path of right view. Actually, I think most of the time in Buddhist teachings, we tend to complicate things a bit too much. We talk a bit too much, which is like what I've been doing. We use way too many concepts, which tends to obscure the underlying, the actual matter that we are concerned with. The concepts are actually quite simple, almost common sense. I watched a short YouTube teaching called A Response to a Request by Tai Situ, and he simplified life into a balance of devotion and compassion. Okay, so I think each one of us can, by exploring the teachings and by really experientially, in terms of our own experience, try to make sense of it, understand it, apply some of the teaching, then we come to our own understanding, come to our own so-called view. And you'll find that when we are been asked to express that view, then each one of us will give a very different description. So here, for example, this the teaching of this Lama, Tai Situ Rinpoche, from the Kagyu tradition, then he would express the right view as one of devotion and living from devotion and compassion. So you can actually make this a challenge for yourself. Sometimes people say, stand on one leg, and within the time that you are able to sustain that posture, explain your understanding of Buddhism. It's almost like asking you to synthesize all these complicated concepts into just something very simple and yet very relevant and very true for yourself based on your own experience, your own understanding, your repeated attempt to verify it and to apply it to your own experience. See whether you can come up with a succinct summary of how you understand it. So one person may emphasize the importance of devotion and compassion. I tend to go in the other direction. So if you ask me to summarize Buddhism, I would actually tell you Buddhism is about conditions, conditions, and conditions. That's it. That's as I would summarize meditation as attention, attention, and attention. Too much of one or the other creates a form of inflexibility. So too much of devotion and too much of compassion. Yeah, it's an unusual way of unusual pair of qualities, devotion and compassion. But I'm sure there are food for thought there to see whether how each one of us understand. So in this case, it's devotion and compassion. I probably would. I don't usually use the word devotion. I will probably think of it as wisdom and compassion, or the hate and the heart. Compassion is more to do with heart, and then the wisdom is more to do with the hate. So no worries. I think sometimes it's good to when we explore a topic, it's good to look at it from different angles. Yeah. Let me just go back to what I was saying. It's very helpful for our own understanding, also as a test of our own understanding, to see whether we for our own sake, can come up with a succinct a summary of how we understand Buddhism, how we understand a particular teaching. Because you find that when we make ourselves express it that way, we are asking ourselves to extract out the essence, the main ideas, as how we have understood that teaching, and that can be very helpful for our own understanding. Not only it forces us to really clarify for ourselves what we understand, but we can then, because it's a summary, it's easy to go back to it and to test it to see whether we have really managed to understand the main ideas. So I was saying Buddhism, main idea is conditions, to think in terms of conditions. Maybe just to elaborate on that as a way to conclude my presentation on right view. The word conditions here, I use it as in a very loose way. Conditions could refer to things that I think as causes that will bring about a certain thing. But conditions could also function at the same time as the object or experience to support it, to sustain it, or being a part of it. Like for example, me, myself as a person, then my physical body or the different organs are a part of me. And those are conditions for my existence and continued existence, or for my continued health. The state of my heart, the state of my lungs, the state of my digestive systems are all conditions that sustain my life and keep me alive. The state of my brain. So conditions can mean causes, conditions can mean parts, conditions can also refer to the environment, the context that we are talking about. Like for example, breathing in, taking oxygen. That oxygen is a condition for my continued existence and survival. In fact, these conditions, the environmental conditions are so important that even for us to survive, when we go to outer space, we had to artificially bring the environment with us. It would be in the form of a space suit, within which we try to recreate some of the most essential conditions for life, without which we will be dead. And so conditions can refer to causes, can refer to parts, can refer to the context, the environment, can also refer to the convention, the language that we use. So it's very varied, but my understanding of the Buddha's teaching is to think in terms of conditions, the coming together of conditions and what they bring about, and the dispersal of the conditions, and therefore also the disappearance, the cessation of that experience of phenomenon. This is embodied in the verse that I quote earlier this evening. When this is, that is, or when this exists, that exists. With the arising of this, with the coming into being of this, there is the arising or the coming into existence of that. And when this is not, when this stops existing, that is not, that stops existing. With the cessation of this, there is the cessation of that. And the this and that, of course, is the ancient way of talking about the various variables in our life and how they relate to one another. Two things are connected in terms of conditions. One serves as a condition for another. And if that is true, then with the arising of this, then we would have the arising of that. If there is a rising of craving, then as a condition, there is a rising of suffering. And if this is true, with the cessation of craving, and likewise there will be the cessation of the corresponding suffering. That is as simple as that. This is the right view, conditionality. This is the view embodied in the Four Noble Truths. And this is the one that we are asked to think about it, and to verify it for ourselves. And if it's true, then we just have to act on it. If I suffer, then there must be the condition of craving. And if I look closely at it and I'm able to dispel and cease this craving, then the suffering will also go away. And if I'm able to completely put an end to all forms of craving, then I will also put an end to all forms of suffering. So this is, and the suffering here, to emphasize, is primarily psychological suffering, emotional suffering, mental suffering, not so much the physical, material situations, which also depends on conditions, but more than this craving. Craving, after all, is a mental state, a state of the heart, a state of the mind. So merely by ceasing craving, it not necessarily means that I will always have an endless supply of contrips. So So it's best to understand it more in the psychological realm. Okay, so that's it. I have blah 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 on for 1.5 hours. I hope you find some of these ideas I present this evening interesting, and you would pursue them a bit, give it a thought, and especially in your meditation, try to put on the lenses of conditionality and examine for yourself in your own experience whether there's any truth to it or not. Okay, and with that, I'll conclude this evening teaching. Wish you a good week ahead, and hope to see you next week while we will continue to explore the Noble Eightfold Path. Right. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.